they lose the fear of death. And because there's this assurance that, of course, we go on. And I think before an experience like that, it's they might believe it, but once you have an experience like a past life or even beyond, you know there's more.
Hello, everyone. It's Holly Hall from The Intelligent Soul. I've got an amazing guest for you guys today. Her name is Dr. Toni Reilly. And I'm sure if you're interested in past lives or reincarnation, or you've even had past life or reincarnation work done, you've heard of Dr. Brian Weiss, which she has worked under. In fact, she has trained. I just find that really fascinating. I've got to talk to her about that. And I've got a bit of a story around that too, which I'm going to share with everyone. She's gone to the college in London. She now lives in Australia, and she does everything from topics. We're going to talk about the purpose of life, past life, reincarnation, the afterlife, grief. That one I really want, and Gen Z, as well as spiritual psychology. She's certified in. So let's welcome Dr. Toni Reilly.
Thanks, Holly. That's a lovely introduction.
Thank you.
I can't wait to have a
First thing
conversation
is,
with you.
I'm going to jump right on right away. We're definitely going to be talking about grief and Gen Z. That's very interesting to me. But I want to talk about your experience with Dr. Weiss.
Okay, well, I just love him. Uh, Part of my awakening, I guess you would call it, in my 30s, I first of all started exploring intuition, but it led me towards reading Many Lives, Many Masters.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read that book, it changed. Oh, it was like I knew what I was here to do, certainly at that point. And it was like, whoa, first time in my life. And I had such clarity. So I remember thinking, I've got to go and have one of these sessions. I wasn't into past lives or anything then. It was all very new. But I read the book and I thought, I've got to go and have a session with him. And of course, he was in America and I'm in Australia. But even by then, this is probably 15 or 18 years ago. Um, Even then, he wasn't seeing clients anymore. But I got to have a regression with the lady, my meditation teacher, who told me to read the book. And it was like, oh, wow. And then, as it happened, a couple of days later, I said, I've got to learn this. She says, I've got a course on the weekend. So I attended it and started working with people with past lives, with the vision to make this life better, to heal whatever they needed. So in that process, of course, because I'd read Dr. Brian Weiss's book, I knew that he trained people.
Mm-hmm.
So after maybe a year of working with people, I went over to train with him in New York, and it was phenomenal. He's because he comes from a clinical background, there's those elements, but he is so lovely and approachable and open, not dogmatic about how it should be done and who it's for, nothing like that. So it was a wonderful, I feel like the most beautiful foundation to hear all that from him. And one of the things that happened during that training was there's 120 people in this training, so it's a bit more like a big workshop. But I knew that he was going to regress only a couple of people on stage. And I thought, I need to be one of those people. So after he regressed the first person, I went up and I said, can you regress me? And he did an eye roll test, which is a hypnosis thing. And he said, yes, okay. So I got to go on stage and be regressed by him. And as serendipity would have it, someone whom I'd met there had an iPhone, which was new as then. It was, I think they may have just put the camera in it, in the iPhones. And it was a little bit blurry, but regardless, I got pictures of me up on stage with the magical
Nice.
Dr. Brian Weiss. So Yeah, and actually later he came to Australia for the first time in 2010 with Hay House. They brought him over, and I got to go to his workshops. There were three: Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. And also the year after when he came, I got to go on television with him on a national morning show here. So it was just wonderful, because I obviously what happens is you're a little bit in awe of someone, and then when you get to be a little bit closer to them, you realize that you're just a
Real people.
person, just a
Yeah.
real person. And he was funny and warm and lovely. Dr. Brian Weiss is up there with the best mentors in my life.
And so
Yeah.
how old were you then?
How old was I? I
Hmm.
would have been
Like in your 20s or 30s?
2000, oh, late 30s, 39 or 40.
Okay. I like to
Yeah.
say this because I have so many clients who are in a rush, to find their passion and where, yeah, I don't know what it is. And I was just speaking to a client last week on all of the people. Hay House, you just mentioned, Louise Hay. She was in her 60s when she opened up Hay House. A lot of people don't
Yep.
realize that. She was in her
Yeah.
90s when she passed away. So she had, a good 30 years of
Yeah.
bringing on people like Wayne Dyer and Brian Weiss and a whole bunch of other uh, authors. Brian Weiss, in case people aren't familiar with who he is, wrote a book, Many Masters, Many Lives, which I happened to briefly read through because my mother read it and it was sitting on the table kind of thing. So I read enough to understand. I read a bunch of past lives that are through it. Basically, it's a diary or documentation of him as a psychologist or psychiatrist who would regress people. The essence was to regress them to their childhood to find out phobias or anxieties or PTSD that came from. But one of his, I can't remember who her name was, Susan, was it? One of his patients regressed further than her birth and then went into the mother's womb and then went into past lives. And he became so fascinated with this that he kept regressing her. And so she went to several different lifetimes. And through that, he wrote this book, but then he also began regressing other people as well. So I do have a question for you. When he regressed you, do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
So
I
you're
remember.
very aware.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're aware. Yeah. So,
Uh,
but it's all going on in here, sort of on your with your inner senses. But I could see. So yeah, it was amazing.
That's interesting. And some of my clients, I don't do past life regression full time. I do it as part of my coaching program with my clients. If anyone wants to take a look at it closer, I'd want to encourage you to go to ToniReillyInstitute.com. We're going to have all of her links below. Past life regression is extremely important, specifically with healing trauma. Now, you've mentioned grief and the afterlife. I want to touch base on that as well. And many of my clients, I'll ask right off the bat, do you believe in reincarnation? Because then I'm not going to go there because I can see it in their charts. And and then we do the past life. The ones that I have done, I usually only recommend it with clients that are stuck. They're like, I don't know why I have this trauma because nothing happened when I was a kid or
Yeah.
things like that. And I had one just last week. She just emailed me, said she's still processing it because it was a tough one. One of the lifetimes was a tough one, but it answers so much questions about why we are experiencing. And I don't know if you do it this way as well, but I have them try to recognize people from the past life and who they are to them in this lifetime and
Yeah.
have conversations with them. I do it in a little bit of a different way. I don't really, even though I'm certified in it, Source gave me my own protocol and how to go about doing it, which you probably intuitively work that way as well,
Me
right?
too. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you find
Absolutely.
is the best benefit for someone? Why would they want to have a past life regression?
Oh, well, two things. Uh, Everybody has the potential from it, and usually what happens is they lose the fear of death. And because there's this assurance that, of course, we go on. And I
Mhm.
think before an experience like that, it's they might believe it, but once you have an experience like a past life or even beyond, you know that you know that there's more. So that's one thing. But I think what it can fix is I feel so broad saying it because it's a broad statement, but it really can fix anything. And I feel like the reason that it does that is because that person, when they're exploring their past life or lives, is being fed what they need to see directly from their soul. And
Yeah.
because the soul is giving this particular past life or these particular scenes from a past life, it's so relevant to them in their life now. And I think that's why it is so powerful, and it will always give some healing and clarity. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I find that as well too. I had one years ago. I still am in contact with her, and it healed the relationship with her mom and dad,
Yeah.
like dramatically. Like she was estranged from them, and now they're going on vacation together. Like
Wow, Holly,
it's
that's amazing. I
insane.
think healing relationships like that, because I think what happens is they either get shown in the past life where maybe they're carrying on or feeling something that was has come over from when they were together before. And so it can be that, but also I think people start to see other people in their lives as also people who are going through stuff, and they're trying to
Right.
navigate life as well. So
Yeah.
it gives them empathy, right?
Yeah, because we put our parents on pedestals, right? They're
We
gods.
do.
Like they're not supposed to make mistakes or be human or
Yeah.
learn. They're not supposed to have problems, struggles. And it really made her parents like very human because they weren't her parents in past lives. So that's what made it shifted.
Different relationships.
What do
Yeah.
you say to people when they go, "Oh, what if I'm just making this up? How do I know this really did happen?" What's your answer
Yeah.
to them?
Look, when people say that to me, I always assure them that even if they feel like they made it up, then why did it come into your awareness now? And just see what it changes. Something always changes within them after their session. So that's what I say. And also, where people even sometimes say that when they've had a really vivid recall, and then they'll be like, oh, their logic kicks in and they're like, well, did I just imagine what I've seen? But it's like when you're facilitating a session and they're moving around the life, it always makes sense, as in the timeline within that lifetime will make
Yeah.
sense, because sometimes you're taking them backwards and forwards within that life. So those are really my assurances.
Have you ever
And of
had,
course they get emotional, Holly.
yes,
Not always, but I think
yes.
I think one of the other big things is they get emotional, and it's it's maybe the scene is not even sad. So it's not necessarily sad emotions, but there's a physical reaction to something that's happening that's kind of beyond logic.
Now, do you do your sessions online or only in person?
I do that mostly, God, since 2017, I've been doing them online.
Yeah, that's so what is it now? Have you heard of the concept that all of our lives are happening at the same time?
Yeah.
Do you subscribe to that? Do you believe that's true?
Look, I don't want to say that it's not true, because it likely is. But for me, from a human perspective, and what I like to work is with now is this lifetime, and exploring past lives is to make this life better. And they are that we're in a time, so we relate to the humanness. So I feel like everything's happening at once, it's too, for me it's just too messy, and it's too hard to comprehend. So it's like, focus on this life, and this is the one that we're living now. So even if it is all happening at once, I think as humans, we have history, and we know that there was, certain times in history. So I like to usually stick with that. Certainly with the past lives, when they go in between lives or beyond, then maybe they get their own perspective shown to them, or information given to them. And then it's okay. I'm not against it by any means.
Yeah, I'm on board with you on that one. It's a little bit strange for me to conceptualize it. Like it kind of makes
Yeah,
sense, but
yeah.
it's hard to integrate it, I guess. Uh,
I think so too.
the understanding of it.
As an individual coming back many times as a different person, a different personality, and we're doing something different each lifetime.
Right.
But the insecurities, there's only a few. So every single lifetime that we reincarnate, we will be doing one of those insecurities. This is something that I really delved into with when developing my psychology, my soul life psychology. Um, so yeah, the lives. And I think that's with when people are shown a past life to make this life better, they may be, usually they'll be presented with the same feeling that they're having now. And
Yeah,
that's why it helps them to truly make sense of what's going on with them now. It's quite extraordinary
it
and
is.
also quite simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, because there's the idea of parallel lives, and then there's all the lives are happening at the same time, that we're living multiple lives at the same time. What you subscribe to, whether it's true or not, or maybe they're all true, they all can
Yeah.
be true. Tell us about your book, Awake.
Yeah, so I wrote the book Awake, The Purpose of Life and Why You're Here because I wanted to outline how our life is planned before we're born and why. So, why we end up with the parents we end up with, why we experience relationships in certain ways, why we do things that go against morals that we've been indoctrinated with.
Right.
All of those things, I wanted to outline that in a book. And I thought that making it around my life would be a good start.
When did you write the book, or when was it published?
Oh, gosh, I started writing that book in probably 2010, maybe even before that, and maybe even a couple of years before that. I didn't finish it until 2015. And you have to stop writing at some point because life just is changing. It's continually changing.
Yeah.
So I had to stop at a certain point. And of course, so much has happened since then, even, but the bones of it remained the same. But it took me so long to write because I changed so much from my mid 30s that and of course about the time it came out I'd have been in my 40s
Hmm.
that when I first started to write it, I was truly victimy and I was writing it from that perspective and a bit of blame going on in there. And then I had to rewrite everything because I had gained a new perspective as well on why everything happened.
So, what did you discover, and what did you write, and what is the purpose of life?
Oh, I feel strongly that the purpose of life is to have an emotional experience. I know people really desire or believe even, sorry, that it's an outcome or it's something that they're here to achieve and there'll be, an end point to that purpose. But really, the discovery is it's every moment of every day.
Yeah. And a lot of people would say the only problem they have in this lifetime is their emotional, the issues around emotions and feelings, and how unregulated really they are most of the time. We're constantly self-regulating. And is that the reason why we're here? Is to, from your
Have an emotion,
understanding?
have a human experience. Yeah. And the one thing, no, there's more than one thing, but we can't, when we leave our body and we're soul energy, we don't have any of the things that a body gives us, which is this body gives us a mind, which and we have touch, taste, sight, and sound, and all of those faculties that we have because of our body, they facilitate an emotion. And I think even where people believe that they have this capacity to control what's happening in their lives, but actually it's all playing out the way that it was going to. So And I think this is something that I think some people get upset about, because by nature we're controllers, because we're, as a human, we have this logic to our human experience.
Yeah,
So wanting to control outcomes and control ourselves is a huge thing. And I feel like emotions over it's changing now because of the newer generations, which we can talk about. But the emotional regulation that is talked about so much, it's like you got to feel them. You can try and deny them, you can try and regulate them, but you need to understand yourself and why you get emotional, or why you react in a certain way. And then that is the only way that you will truly regulate them. So it's not by controlling because someone told you you overreact or you do this. When you understand why, that is the only way that you can truly regulate them. I think just by understanding the behaviors that your emotions invoke in you or invoke in us.
I agree with you. I find
Yeah.
that I use the analogy that you're in the driver's seat, but you've got to
Yeah.
discover who the driver is.
Yes.
You're the
That's a
driver. Who's behind who's behind in the seat, who's behind the wheel, and who is that's navigating the car. And a lot of
yeah.
times we're navigating this car, we're driving it full force, we're sitting in the seat, but we don't even know who we are. We don't know where we're
That's right.
going. We don't know what we're doing. We think we are. We think we do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you don't unless you know who you are. And so many of us navigate our lives comparing ourselves to others.
Yeah.
And so you're not who you are. You are the comparison against another person. That's what I love about astrology is that you can read it. I can read a chart and I can tell even who I am at any given moment, like who I am 10 years ago is not the same person. And this
Yeah.
did a little mini one for
Yeah.
you
So on point.
I explained themselves better than they even ever knew themselves, but they completely resonated with it. They're like, you had
Yeah.
said that you did come to tears a little bit because I knew you did past life regression. I wanted to focus on whatever I could see about your past life. I did
Yeah.
touch about what's going on currently with you as
Yeah.
well. Did you feel like sharing what brought you to tears a bit?
Oh, I can tell you, part of one of the everything you said in my reading was correct, and I can relate to it. And I guess because I've been in this self-awareness world for, oh my gosh, like 20 odd years.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not afraid to go deep with it and just, find out what's going on with myself. Um, but what brought me to tears was you talked about being smart. And one of the things that I grew up believing was that I was dumb. And of course, now for a long time, I've known that I'm the absolute opposite to what I believed about myself. And still now, and I'm 53 now, it still brought me to tears when
I
this
acknowledge that you are
affirmation.
very intelligent. You're a very
Yeah.
intelligent soul.
So yeah, so the tearing up was it was there
And that's
on
how you
point.
know I'm speaking to your soul
Yeah.
because it's your soul that felt acknowledged at that moment that I had said that is you come from even a lifetime where you were a sage as well, like a very wise person, always speaking your truth. Did you find it difficult to leave mainstream and do this work on a full-time basis challenging? And do you find it getting any better or easier?
Back then, when I started the mission, I'm going to call it the mission because I was so guided with everything, and I listened. I listened to my intuition. Um, and the guidance was to bring this to mainstream. And part of my life, which I talk about in that book, is I ended up with the treasured mom. I just adore my mom. I still do. But I ended up with a mom who was um a witch. Well, she says she's a witch. And and she loves it. She's proud of it. So and I remember even as a child, we weren't spiritual per se, certainly not new agey, but my mom shared stories that I can remember as a little kid about, doors opening, or she was floating, or all of these things. And those stories, because I just adored my mom and I trusted her implicitly, I knew that if my mom said it, then it was true.
Yes.
So I guess I always had this belief or assurance that these things are true and have happened because my mom said them. So, and I know a lot of people coming out of the spiritual closet, it's difficult because they're raised in very religious backgrounds. And so for them, it's much harder. For me, I know that I had these parents. I did have some religious input as well, but not from my mom. My dad tried to, I think, do the right thing about how he was indoctrinated, but I always had these two sides that made me also make up my own mind. So, yeah, I guess in that regard, it wasn't hard to come out. I do remember when the past life stuff came in so strongly, and I started to, of course, I went to train in it. And I was regressing everyone who wanted to be regressed in my family and everything. And I remember my dad said, Tone, I don't know what this is, but it seems to make you happy. So I never got any pushback from the people
Oh, that's
closest to
awesome.
me.
That's
It's
not,
very
that's very
nurturing,
rare.
actually. Yeah, very, I mean, it's not luck, but I felt really lucky. And so I think coming out wasn't so difficult. And because I started on the ground, unlike Brian Weiss, where he's an established um, psychiatrist and he's surrounded by logical people, and he really has to come out and say,
In the
he's
70s.
discovered this whole new
Yeah.
thing in the 70s. But for me, I was kind of starting from where him and others like him had left off, and developing something new around reincarnation and past lives, and to develop a new psychology. So for me, it was a little bit less about coming out and more about starting to develop something new around it.
And
But, oh,
oh,
Holly, sorry, I'm thinking about how what did change maybe some relationships for me was self-awareness. It's like when I started to get to know myself and also realized I was messy and I had insecurities, self-worth stuff. It was a shock to me when I first knew that, because it was like, I never thought about this, but I'm pretty messed up. It was also so liberating. But because of that, I think you do end up moving away from some people who were very logical in their thinking and just
yeah,
basically not interested. So
right.
it's okay. But yeah, I think that happens to probably most people, even throughout our lives, whether we get into this line of work or not.
I read a wonderful, or maybe I seen it on a podcast, but they had said when you shift, even something as simple as when you leave a marriage or when you leave the corporate world, a job, or when you shift your perspective, you actually shift into another dimension, another. So even though the people are still in your world, they're not going to view you the same as when you were in their same paradigm. And now that
Right.
you're in a new paradigm, they can't understand, they can't see. It's like you're speaking a different language. And for them to conceptualize it, they have to find something wrong with it. It looks like there's something wrong because
Yeah.
they have a hard time understanding it. What is Gen Z?
Gen Z. So Gen Z, I became aware of later. I have three kids who were born just before that starts, or at the very beginning of it. But I realized that a lot of the work that I was doing with developing a new psychology was actually for them. And do you remember when they talked about the year 2000 and all this was going to happen? And people thought the computers were going to break down because how are they going to go from
Yes.
1999 to 2000? It
Yeah.
was nothing to do with that. It was all to do with that the kids born from the year 2000 have a soft energy. Every single one of them is born with two energy within their persona, within their character. It's
Hmm.
inherent.
Hmm.
And that means no matter what our religion or our culture is across the planet, they're all born since 2000 with that softness within. So whereas before that, we all had the 1 and the 9 in this century anyway, we had the 19, and those energies are very much doing energy, so practical in some ways, and also thinking. Whereas in the year 2000, depending on the birth date, some of them had so much two energy that they're just here to make us more connected. This is my summary. I could ramble about it all day. I love that topic. But basically, they're here to bring humanity back to being more connected and
Yeah.
having more empathy for each other and understanding emotions more.
Yeah.
And they do inherently come in with that capacity, which is very different to before Gen Z. So it's a massive change in humanity, and you can hear the older generations are like, what is going on with them? But actually, they're truly magical. They're soft, they're sweet, they are tuned into their feelings. Feelings are not always pleasant either, but they're tuned into them. You can
Yeah.
hear it when they're talking. They're like, I feel this and I feel that. Makes my heart sing
I'm so
when I
stressed
hear it.
out.
Yeah, they definitely have that because they're so sensitive. They definitely are tuned into all of the energy that's going on around. And I do believe that's why we see such an extraordinary influx of anxiety or the description of anxiety because they're sensitive to this energy. And it's not calm yet. So they come in at the beginning of this change. So it's going to be tricky for them.
Well, they're here to highlight the change. They're here to highlight the problem. Therefore, if you've got like a highly or hypersensitive child, hypersensitive central nervous system, when really
Yeah.
not sensitive in a good way, that means all of their receptors, all of their senses are more powerful than ours are. And yet they're thrusted into a world that is full of negative ions and energies and food and chemicals and pollution and microwave energy and even our Wi-Fi energy. They're thrusted into this world that's really shaking them up, causing them a lot of issues. But they're also here to highlight, like, maybe we need to take a look at the food industry. Maybe we need to take a look at our agriculture and our environments where they're being taught in schools, etc. I'm hoping, and I've heard the same thing, that anyone from 2000 on, not all of them, but most of them have come here to help change the future.
I feel like, well, that's right. The way that from all of my observations and people going within and even my own guidance, that's absolutely true. And these first wave, I don't even like to call them a wave, but they're
But
in
you're
their
right. Yeah, they're
20s.
the kind of the
They're
first.
like in their mid 20s. And it's like,
Yeah.
they're starting to come into influence now, so they'll continue to permeate. But yes, they were certainly bridging the gap. The first lot, they're here bridging the gap between because they're coming from our generations where we were so logical and like easing into this much more intuitive way to live, which of course was when we started in humanity. But they certainly, I guess what we can see happening is because they are sensitive to the foods that we eat and things like that, we can see it's changing. The knowledge is presented because I think what we know as parents is you just want to help your kid. You want to help your kid feel better.
Yeah.
And so it was really smart. And I feel like this is not absolute, but it's certainly most of it is these kids were born to millennial parents. They're also here bridging the gap. And those are the parents that predominantly who come in and they're like, they got to sort this shit out for their kid because otherwise their child is so uncomfortable. And so as everyone's doing this as parents, it's all happening and it's all changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of parents working with their children, and I love doing readings for children so they have an understanding of where their children are coming from.
Yeah.
And if they go, well, they can't settle down in school and they're having such a hard time, and I can't pull them out. I got to keep working. And I'm like, if you can get them into a private school, great. But the school system is not optimal for children. It hasn't been for 20, 30 years. And these
Yeah.
kids are highlighting that. Your child doesn't want to go to school. They know that this isn't right. This is not normal. This isn't comfortable for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's another thing that it will be forced to change. It's being forced to change. Everything's being forced to change because of them, from clinical psychology to our education systems and the food that we eat. And just everything is affected. It's being affected and it's changing. It might not feel like it at the moment because it's kind of collapsing around us, but
Yeah.
it's changing. It's on the way to being better.
Love that explanation of Gen Z, and I 100% agree with you. And they are magical children born to star seeds or indigos. And I don't know what we call these ones. I guess Gen Zs, as you said, but they should have a magical name too, I think.
I feel like,
What about,
Holly, I feel like the easiest way to just caveat them and
yeah,
us is we defaulted to logic, but they default to intuition. So, and that's the easiest way to say how great the change is. When I say we, you and I are probably highly intuitive as they are, but most of our generations were not. We were a minority. Whereas with these kids or these young people, they, the majority of them are super sensitive and they default to their intuition.
yeah, absolutely. My daughter is extremely intuitive.
Yeah,
I'm still trying to teach her that half of your emotions aren't yours. You're picking up on
that's
other
true.
people's emotions,
Yeah,
but she's like, I don't care, Mom. I still feel them. It still
yeah,
feels like
that's true.
crap.
Yeah,
So I completely understand that it's hard to be an empath, and she's starting to understand it. Once you own it, then you can recognize it and you can differentiate the difference between your feelings and somebody else's feelings.
yeah.
And you don't,
Discerning the difference,
yeah, it's huge. You still
hyper
feel
important.
it. One
Yeah,
of the best ways I teach people is I said, if you walk into a grocery store and you feel like you get dizzy or you get anxious all of a sudden, or you're angry all of a sudden, and even if it's to the extreme of you're having a panic attack, and then you're like, I got to get out of this grocery store and I'm never going to go into a grocery store again. If you went in there fine, but once you got in there, you weren't, and then when you left, you were fine, it's not you.
that's right.
It's somebody
That's
in the
right.
grocery store. It's
Yeah.
something happening, or somebody or a group of people maybe in the grocery store that you're picking up on. Hospitals is a good one. When I
Oh,
see
yeah.
people that are really empathic, I tell them, I said, I bet you can't even go in a hospital, can you? No.
Yeah.
I see Afterlife. You have that on your website that you work with the afterlife. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So a lot of, I guess my intuitive ability is I can connect to people who are passed over. It's not my, it's not really my, hasn't been my specialty, but I've done a lot of training in it. I've been to London to the Arthur Findlay College many times. In fact, I just was there last month. And prior to that, I had been there 12 years ago many times. But this time, my daughter, who is about to be 25, she's my youngest daughter, she wanted to go. And she went by herself a year or two ago as well. She works with me. Also, she does her own thing. But so we went to college and just, it was just so lovely to see her there. And she's so tuned to it. And it's just wonderful. So yeah, the afterlife, I think, is a couple of things, but for me, working with the afterlife as a form of therapy is yes, you can go get a medium to connect for you or be the conduit for you. And mediums are very misunderstood. and they're so helpful. They are so helpful. And I think all of the negativity around them comes from films and a lot of perpetuated old-fashioned beliefs around it. But mediums are magical for grief in that they can give someone who's grieving for a lost loved one a message from their lost loved one. But for me, when I say working with the afterlife, I love to facilitate that they go and visit their loved one in the afterlife themselves. So, and much like we can facilitate to take them into a past life, we can also facilitate to take them into a space where their loved one can reach them and they can have their own conversation with their loved one or just have a beautiful experience with them.
You're
It's
giving me
just
chills
so
because I
lovely.
just did your reading and I said to you, that's exactly what you do. I said, you could talk to people passed on, or maybe you facilitate and help people talk to their higher
I do.
self or their other
Yeah.
selves or their ancestors. That's amazing. That's amazing. And you do
Mm.
that in a bit of a trance state as well. Like you put them,
Oh,
like you would do a past life regression, you put them in that
yeah, so I
state.
I call it a meditative state, which is the same thing. But yes,
Yeah.
you just guide them into relaxation and
Yeah.
then facilitate for this meeting to take place. So it's a big part of this psychology that I developed. It's a big part of, I think, something that I realized is that grief is a pinnacle in our lives. We have birth, grief, and death. And of course, we have everything in between. But in my observation, grief is such a pinnacle because it's potentially the first time that people question their life. It doesn't have to be because someone died that they go into grief, but
Right.
one way or another, it's this internal introspection where you start to think, why am I here? Why did this happen? What's the greater purpose? And I think because the emotions are so strong, we are forced in that phase in grief to really think deeply and reflect deeply. So, and it's pretty unpleasant, but I think when people don't have an understanding of the afterlife, then for them to absolutely know that their person or the spirit of their person is still right there with them and they can communicate with them, make contact with them. It's such a beautiful thing to see or to
With
facilitate.
my very first past life regression, I was around 21 and my mother did it for me. And I went into a past life where I was a servant for a king and he raped me basically, and I got pregnant. And then when they found out I was pregnant, I was kicked out of the kingdom. Uh, I was very young, like 16, 17, something like this. And then I got scarlet fever. Like, this is crazy. Like, you can't make this stuff up. I don't think
No,
so.
you can't.
Anyways, I got scarlet fever and I had my baby on my own. I gave birth to my own baby. And then I had scarlet fever and I knew I wasn't going to live. And I was like, I got this little baby. And I literally put her in, I forget what they call them, but you go to the church and you put them in the little box and then they turn
Yeah.
and the nuns take them. And then I died um,
Whoa.
soon after that. And I thought, what does that mean? Like, why didn't I? Well, I had a really hard time having children in this lifetime. And I had one, a
Yeah.
miracle baby. And I knew that when she moved out of the home, I was going to be devastated. And I relate it to that grief, that I'm
It,
still not over the grief from that past life.
you're so right. It's really wonderful talking to you about this. Goosebumps the whole time you're talking about that past life. And I call them truth bumps because they come up when,
Truth bumps.
not just around past lives, but all sorts of things. And it's like, it's the truth.
That you can do a future life regression, that our future lives exist just like our past lives
Yeah.
exist. Have you ever done anything like that?
Yeah. In the Brian Weiss workshop, they do take you into the future. And I glimpsed the future. But in my practice or working with people, whenever you can certainly prompt for them to go into the future, but what I found was they would go into the future of this life and see for themselves an outcome. And it might have been that they were pining for love relationship and desperately wanting to get back together. And I think given the soul's all-knowingness, if it's not going to happen and you kind of got to get on with your life and find meaning in something else, then they would see maybe 5-10 years into the future of this life. But you certainly can facilitate that they go into the future. Yeah.
That's interesting. So
Mm.
basically, would you say, in a nutshell, that having a past life regression or several of them, well, that would be my
Yeah.
last question. How many lifetimes would you say we all have?
Oh my goodness. I think that it's impossible to know because it could be thousands.
Yeah,
It could be so many.
that's
But
what
I
I think.
think obviously because the soul's all knowing about what each of us is doing here, it gives us just the ones that are somehow relevant to this life.
Have you ever done a past life regression where they weren't on Earth? They were somewhere else?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Where were
Lots of
they?
time, lots of times where I'm going to say mainstream people would come along for this and they're like, what was that? But so it takes them by surprise as well. And oh gosh, they would go to places where we're much less uh, human as this, but human-like. But
Mhm.
they might be light, maybe you can even see through them, or very tall. Or I had a spate of people talking about being blue people. So they go to all sorts of places. But for me, the focus was on the kind of traditional past lives because it makes sense for this. But having said that, when people go to those other places, they're much more energetic than Earth. And there's something for them to know, usually about themselves. They're here to do something within the evolution of humanity. I would suggest when they go there, that's what I've noticed. But yeah, people go to all sorts of places, not just Earth.
Is there a common thread or a common theme? Like I think that with Brian Weiss, when he wrote his book, he did start getting answers as well and had, or Dolores Cannon, I don't know if you followed any of her work, was getting a common theme when people would go into regression. Do you find that common theme, or was there anything that you've learned about, like something you didn't know before that you learned just because you did so many past life regressions with people?
Oh, I feel like the commonality with the past lives is discovering that there's only these various few insecurities. Actually, I think in traditional psychology, they call them attachment styles, or that's the result of these insecurities. But so it was evident that that's been with us through the whole
Healing.
of humanity,
Yeah.
and that the simple things in life have remained as important as ever. So things like uh, our parents, losing parents, death, um, being successful at something, those things that are still the basis of being a human
Yeah.
were always as equally as important as they are now. So really the simple things in life are what life is all about. It's connections, enjoying relationships, or having relationships that cause us to rear up our insecurities. But those would be the common themes of past lives. But when they go beyond into between lives, where I see it as home and a bit less of the structure that the Journey of Souls guy, Michael Newton, had documented in his research. What I see is when they go beyond that, is always the same. It's always the same recollection, and it's always this, it's all loving. It's kind of everything but nothing there. And I think as part of my mission to create this new psychology, I got to experience these places for myself. And I think once you experience it for yourself, then there's no question that it exists. So then for me, all the people that would come along and have a similar experience, it's like, I know what you mean, because it's almost impossible to describe in difficult terms, in
Between.
human terms. It's also, well, it's extraordinary. I think, though, with that space, the in-between space, I think when people have near-death experiences, a lot of what they talk about or experience there, while it's individually for them and this life, there's always a commonality with that loving sensation that you receive there.
Hmm. I love that. So past life regression will help people with trauma, grief, understanding relationships,
Yeah,
difficulty ones and healthy ones. It could help them understand themselves and why they're going through this lifetime the way that they are and why they've
yeah.
met the people that they have. And anything else you can add to that?
I think one of the other things that it is quite miraculous in fixing or healing is physical symptoms, because physical symptoms feel so physical, but if it persists, but there's no evidence of it when people go to try and check it out with with Western medicine, but they keep having these headaches or they keep having this pain in the back or whatever it is, if they come along for past life regression, they will find that there's something there that's persisting and it goes like this. It's amazing. So I guess the other thing, other than physical symptoms, is fears and phobias and just things
Yeah.
that don't make sense. Even as simple as if you are really afraid of heights, but you haven't been high in this lifetime, been up high, then why is that there? There's no logical reason that caused you to be afraid of it. So phobias that stop people living their life to the fullest, you absolutely can explore them in the past life.
Or if
And
there's
it
a
fixes it.
common theme or a common pattern that you have
Oh
in your life
yeah.
over and over and over again, it's like, why does this keep happening? And I'm trying to
Those,
do everything different and I'm aware
all
of
of
it,
those
but these same people keep coming in my life.
Yeah, yeah. And those, I think that's the beauty of it, is it makes sense to the person then. And then there's no more work to be done. It's like they're given the answer or the key. They're given the key to the core reason behind it. And it's like it almost dissolves it. It's so good.
And just
Yeah.
having that understanding of what, like you said, we just want to be in control.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. That's a human default.
It's a,
Yeah.
I think it's a default too. We can go with the flow. I think there was a time when we were a little bit more in tuned with
Right.
connection with
Absolutely.
the planet and Earth and amongst each other and community and whatnot. But I think that's
Yes, I feel like we're evolving back to that.
we will,
Back to
we
that. Yeah.
will. That we recognize how I think we still got a little ways to go,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
but we recognize that our technology has separate not just technology, because I like technology, don't get me wrong. I think there's a
Yeah, I
lot
love
of
it.
great things around technology, but we've become too reliant on bigger controls that gauge how we live and the way we live, and we don't rely enough on each other as a community. And so we've
Yeah,
lost community, and we're in the midst of getting that back, getting
we
that
are.
community back. It's been
Yeah.
like this for a while. I always tell people since the industrial age, we kind of
Mhm.
slowly started to lose community.
Mm, that's right.
And then it's really strong in the last 20 years. Where do you perceive us creating that community again?
Oh, I feel like I'm going to say by force, but I feel like a natural progression will put us in situations where we are almost forced to support each other or rely on each other once again, rather than we're so separate in Western culture. It's not actually across the world, but in our culture,
You're right.
we are so you probably don't even know your neighbors.
No,
A lot of people don't even know their neighbors. And I've been living in apartments for years, and I tell you, you may not see them. You may never have a conversation with them, and they live right next door. So the I think the disconnectedness is so evident. But then when you see in an apartment, there might be a fire alarm goes off, for example, and then everyone's has to go outside, and it's like, whoa, who knew there were all these people, and they start talking. And I think when help is needed, I think humans, they do want to help each other because it makes us feel good to do that. So that's what I think slowly it will get back to the point where circumstances um ensure, not force, ensure that we will become more connected with each other again.
I agree 100%. I could go down that rabbit hole for another
Oh
hour,
yeah.
but we're going to wrap it up now. Everyone, I want you to look at all of her contacts, get a hold of her past life. She does past life regressions full time. I don't do it full time. So she's going to be, and she's got tons of training. If you have the means, or reach out to Dr. Toni, get a past life regression, even if you just have one, it will change your life. I know it. I've experienced it as giving past lives. I've experienced by having a past life done, and I've only done a few. I know that Dr. Toni has done hundreds. Definitely reach out to her, take a look at her book. It's life changing. And like in 1 hour, you can change your life. Why not?
Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
last words?
Oh, my last words are just be nice to yourself, be kind to yourself, and try your best to surrender and know that there's purpose in every situation, even being stuck in the traffic.
There's a reason, because you know
Yeah,
what? One day this is going to be your past life.
yeah. That's true.
One day this. So how do you want? Are you gonna have
Yeah,
a regression done? Because it's gonna be normal then.
yeah,
Everybody will do it once a
absolutely.
week.
Next
It's like, did you do your past life regression day? Of course I did.
lifetime.
Thank you for listening. May the stars be with you, and may all your dreams come true. Namaste.